Good afternoon. The time is 8:04 p.m. Good evening, I should say. I'm Raj Dixit, Vice President of the Sacramento Valley Astronomical Society. This meeting is being recorded the Zoom meeting is being recorded, by the way, because we will make the presentation available on YouTube sometime next week. With thanks to our very helpful member and valued contributor, Nicholas Henderson. Thank you to Kevin Normington, our treasurer, for sharing that lovely video with us. I posted the URL or the website name for the video to learn more about MOSAC. So happy early Halloween, everyone. Today we are discussing the ghost hunt for Halloween 2020. And the ghost hunt seems to be a tradition started by Astronomy magazine, namely Stephen James O'Meara, who is an ace observer, of 109 ghostly or faint fuzzy objects. It's Halloween themed. It's a chance to look at objects that present a ghostly or spectral appearance in the eyepiece or in photographs. In reviewing my records, I've seen most of them, not all of them. I pared it down from 109 to 75 or so. I only picked the ones who had nicknames. And I've posted a link to the entire list in the chat section where you can download the list. Also, you can email me. I posted my SVAS email in the chat section. You can email me at vicepresident@savas.org. And I can send you a copy of the list upon your request. Oh, here we go. Welcome, Darcy. All right, so, ladies and gentlemen, you will see things tonight that frighten you, that scare you, that horrify you. Things that may melt your mind with fear, with terror. Let us begin. Let us start. Oops. Right. You will see things beyond imagination, beyond comprehension. Ah! That was true cosmic horror, ladies and gentlemen. The way this talk is organized is that we'll be thinking about what you can see basically on Halloween night. And the list of objects goes, in case it seems a little haphazard, there is a method to the madness. The list is not organized by constellation. The list is organized in order of increasing right ascension. Think of it in terms of increasing longitude across the sky, starting at more or less the 0 hour of right ascension, which is the equivalent of the Greenwich Observatory in England, 0 longitude, which is in Pisces, near Andromeda, right about here, and working its way eastward across the sky. So basically, more or less going in this direction. So our first object is this humble thing, the Bow Tie Nebula, which I first saw in 2016. It's also a Caldwell object, in addition to being a Herschel 400 object. It's a planetary nebula in Cephus. And for the uninitiated, what is a planetary nebula? A planetary nebula is basically a dead star. It's a star roughly the size of our sun. Our sun may indeed go out like this in several billion years, that having burned up most of its usable fuel, sheds its skin like a snake, and that leads to an ever-expanding shell of hot glowing gas. It's not a supernova. The star doesn't explode. You have to be a much bigger star to go supernova. But stars more or less the size of our sun usually end up dying like this. The center becomes a white dwarf, and the remaining skin or hot gases of the sun expand outward. This is also a Caldwell object. The Caldwell catalogs a list of 109 interesting things to see in the sky. The Herschel 400 catalog is a list of of the 2,500 objects discovered by the brother and sister team of William and Caroline Herschel, the 400 most famous of them have been compiled into an observing list, and it's an observing challenge. I completed the Herschel 400 a couple of years ago. Now I'm working on the Herschel 400 Part 2 list, and I'm a little more than halfway through that. This is everyone's favorite, or almost one of the favorite ones. This is Messier 31, the Andromeda Galaxy. This is basically the dominant galaxy in our local group of galaxies. It's slightly larger than the Milky Way. It's moving toward us, and in 3.75 billion years, the Milky Way and Andromeda will merge. So set your calendars and get ready. It's 2.5 million light years away right now. When I say Messier, most of you know this, but for the uninitiated, Charles Messier was a comet hunter in the late 1700s in France. He found an object, some say 109, I say 110. O'Meara, for some reason, insists on 109, of 110, 109 objects that are not comets, but appear to be comets. And he cataloged them so as not to warn other astronomers who were comet hunters like him, don't be distracted by these faint fuzzies. They're not, whatever they are, they're not comets. This galaxy is the 31st, and there's M32 and M110. Those are two smaller dwarf galaxies that orbit the main galaxy, just as the Milky Way has its two Magellanic clouds, which are only visible from the southern hemisphere. Love this object. And you can see M31 with the naked eye if you get to a dark enough sky. That's Halloween themed. That's called the Skull Nebula in Cetus. It's another planetary nebula. Again, there's a central star that died and became now a dwarf, and the shell of expanding gases looks uncannily like a skull in this Hubble photograph. And in an amateur telescope with the right filter, an ultra block filter or an O3 filter, you can actually get a surprisingly good look at it, and it does bear a faint resemblance to a skull. Anyone who grew up in the 1980s playing the first generation of video games will appreciate this. This is the Pac-Man Nebula, NGC 281 in Cassiopeia. Now, this is not a planetary nebula. This is a bright or emission nebula. Emission nebulas formed in areas of where there are young stars and areas of star birth, and the heat and energy from all those young stars causes the surrounding gas and dust to glow brightly, not merely to reflect, that's a different type of nebula, but to actually give off their own light. And that's what's happening here. The dark clouds are the colder gas and dust out of which are being compressed by their own gravity to a point where their own gravity will ignite the fusion process and give birth to young stars. The reason for the Pac-Man name should be pretty obvious given the outline. And for the uninitiated, NGC stands for New General Catalog, a catalog of astronomical objects compiled in the late 1800s by the British Royal Society of all known existing galaxies, star clusters, and nebulas at the time. It's about 7,800, close to 7,900 objects in that, and most of them, and all the most famous objects are known by either Messier numbers, because he found the easiest and brightest ones, or NGC numbers for the New General Catalog. This is a nice spooky one for Halloween. This is called this right here. Don't pay attention to that. Pay attention to this. This is called Mirac's Ghost because NGC 404. It is a small galaxy, and in this overexposed photo, to bring it out, this is a star in the constellation Andromeda called Mirac, or Mirac. And this galaxy is called Mirac's Ghost because it just happens to be in the same line of sight as a star. It can be very difficult to see this in a telescope because the glare, it's a bright star in a telescope. It's visible with the naked eye. And the brightness of the star overwhelms the galaxy, making it, you have to look hard and do some juggling of your scope and eyepiece to see it properly. I have seen it. I saw it for the first time back in 2016. It's a spiral galaxy about 10 million light years away from us. It's our first ghost of the evening. And while we're going along, I may play a game of guess the costume. In other words, if something is on this list, you may wonder, what is this supposed to be? Now, this being a ghost suddenly makes sense given the explanation. All right, so what is this supposed to be? This is an open cluster. Okay, an open cluster, for the uninitiated, is a group of young stars that have basically burned off most of the gas and dust around them, but are not the same age as our sun. Our sun is a middle-aged star at 6 billion years old. These are much younger stars that are still in tight formation, since they all grew up together out of the same original gas cloud. As they're moving apart slowly, but they are still basically in close physical proximity. As you can look at the background stars, you can see that these stars are visibly closer together. They have a relationship. This is jokingly called the ET cluster. Look at the eyes, look at the body with the feet, look at the arms, or the owl cluster. Owls are more Halloween-themed animal. There are about 150 stars in this cluster. It's a Caldwell object as well, Caldwell 13. It's a Herschel 400 object. It's NGC 457, and it's 7,900 light years away from Earth. This is another open cluster, NGC 559. Now, O'Meara uses a nickname for this that he must have made up, because I've never seen it in all my research, because I did research all of these objects. This is another one that I have seen, but I saw it back in November of 2015. This is called the ghost goblet. Where is getting a ghost and where is getting a goblet? I have no idea. Maybe it's this shape is a goblet, or is an upside down goblet for that being the stem. I don't know, but it's a pretty cluster. In case you're wondering how I saw these objects, because I have seen most of them, I saw a few in a refractor, but the vast majority of my observing is done with a Newtonian telescope. And this is how a Newtonian telescope works. A refractor or spyglass-based telescope uses a front lens. The Newtonian design uses a mirror. It's a reflector. It has a parabolic mirror at the back. The light from the star, whatever you're looking at, comes in. It hits the parabolic mirror and is caused by the parabola to be focused into a flat secondary mirror, just like the mirror in your bathroom, although more highly polished, and into your eyepiece. And the thing about this design is that you stand up to look through it. You don't crouch over or bend over. Instead, you need to stand up higher, especially on a big telescope, because the eyepiece is very near the eye level. That is my old Dobsonian telescope. It was a nice scope. It had a 10-inch mirror. This was up at a place called Cronin Ranch. This is a 16-inch Newtonian telescope. In case you're wondering why I use the term Dobsonian, John Dobson was actually living at the time in Sacramento back in the 60s. He would build Newtonian telescopes, but his idea was this type of mounting. Rather than putting the telescope on a tripod, which was heavy and too high up and unstable, he built this ground-based, almost cannon mounting that allowed you to put the center of gravity right onto the bearings and then move the telescope up and down and left and right. And that Dobsonian mount really revolutionized amateur astronomy by making observations much easier. And look how much more beautiful the scope is without that hideous monster next to it that we saw at the beginning. Mm-hmm. All right, now the Dobsonian telescope, they're called Dobsonians, but they're really Newtonians, because Sir Isaac Newton himself came up with the mirror design, the idea of using a reflecting system. Dobson in the 1960s came up with a mounting system, but it was Sir Isaac Newton himself in the 1700s who came up with a reflector system. That is Sir Isaac Newton, perhaps the greatest scientist that ever lived, mathematician, astronomer, physicist, and he invented the Newtonian telescope. So all Dobsonians are really Newtonians, just on a Dobson mount. Now, Dobsonians are the best bang for your buck, but you have to be careful, ladies and gentlemen, because Dobsonian telescopes, there are a lot of cheap knockoffs. There are a lot of imitations being made. There are a lot of people who are denigrating Isaac Newton's legacy with cheap, bad quality knockoffs. Yeah, like I said, cheap, low quality knockoff imitations. So don't be fooled by those fraud artists. Make sure when you're looking for Newtonian, you demand the genuine article, as shown here. All right. Our next object is Messier, or M33, called the Triangulum Galaxy because it's located in the Triangulum Galaxy. Now, this is a beautiful galaxy. It's part of our local group. It's 2.7 million light years away. And it's surprisingly hard to see because it's very large in the eyepiece. It has a very large overall surface area, and hence its overall surface brightness is quite low. It can be quite tricky to see unless the way to find it is to use low power at the beginning. Then once you've tracked it down, then increase the mag to a point where you can see the individual, these red dots. These are hydrogen 2 regions. These are bright nebula of intense star formation. On a good dark night with a good sky, you can actually see these clouds inside the structure. The hard part is finding the whole galaxy to begin with because its overall brightness is surprisingly low for a galaxy. First saw it in August of 2015 when I had just gotten my first 8-inch Dobsonian, which I later gave away. It's hard to believe that I now have a Dobsonian telescope that's twice that size. Sometimes I miss that little 8-inch because it was a lot easier to lift and carry and set up and take down. Another galaxy, Messier number 74. And why is this Halloween themed? Because its nickname, for some reason, is the Phantom Galaxy. And what's more Halloweenish than a phantom? This is 32 million light years away. It's got 100 billion stars, so it's roughly the size of the Milky Way galaxy. Because the Milky Way galaxy, our own Milky Way, has between 100 and 400 billion stars. Now, phantom is actually, when I think about it, more appropriate because, again, this galaxy can be surprisingly hard to find because it appears so wide visually. Its overall surface brightness can be kind of low, and that can make it a little hard to find unless you know exactly where to look, and you probably need a little bit more aperture than you might think to see it. This charming object is Messier 76, the Little Dumbbell Nebula. It's 2,500 light years away, 1.25 light years across. A light year is 6 trillion miles, just as a reminder. And this is another planetary nebula. So I can only hope that when our sun goes, it makes something as pretty as this. But don't fret, that won't happen for at least another 5 or 6 billion more years. So I don't know about you, but I've always started stockpiling toilet paper for that day. Another open cluster. This is NGC 663 in Cassiopeia. And it's referred to as the horseshoe cluster. Again, if someone were trick-or-treating and showed up looking like this and you asked them what they were and they said they were a horseshoe, I'm not sure I would give them any candy. Perhaps they're referring to this inner crescent. Perhaps they're referring to the overall structure. Hard to say. But it is a nice object. I've seen it before, and it's also a Caldwell object. There are about 400 stars there. It's only about 20 million years old as opposed to our 5 or 6 billion year old sun, and it's Caldwell object number 10. Now, I was using this. Some of you who were here at the beginning of the meeting may have noticed this was my background. This is the famous double cluster in the constellation Perseus, NGC 869 and 884. 869 is this denser one. This is 884. This is about 7,500 light years away. The stars are estimated to be about 13 million years old. There are about 20,000 stars total in both clusters. And this is one of the few things in the universe that's not rapidly moving away from us. It's actually approaching us. Now this is NGC 891, called the Outer Limits Galaxy. Many of you might remember a show called The Outer Limits. It was kind of a competitor to The Twilight Zone. It often featured sci-fi stories involving spooky things such as aliens and whatnot. This galaxy was one of the several discovered by Caroline Herschel, the sister of William Herschel, who in the late 1700s She and her brother were literally cataloging the universe, discovering thousands of galaxies and nebulae that no one had ever seen before. This is one of the galaxies she discovered. It's 31 million light years away. And the outer limits name is well deserved, because when I was looking at it back in October of 2015, I discovered something. And now I know why it's called the outer limits. Whoa. Yes, that's what I saw. But for some reason, my name is not on any catalog. This is NGC 1023, the Perseus lenticular or lens-shaped galaxy. Rather unremarkable. I've seen it. It's actually a barred spiral, although it's hard to tell from this photograph. It's 19 million light years away. This is NGC 1333, the Embryo Nebula. Embryo Nebula is a name that Stephen James O'Meara seems to have made up, because I could not find that referred to as the Embryo Nebula in any other resource I could find online. This is what I was talking about earlier. This is a reflection nebula. The light here, even though there are some hot young stars nearby, the glow by this gas and dust is not caused by the energy of those young stars actually ionizing the gas and dust and causing them to emit light. Rather, the gas and dust near these young stars is reflecting the light of those stars, but it's not independently emitting light. So that's why it's not a bright or emission nebula. It's a mere reflection nebula. It's technically in Perseus, but it's right on the border with Taurus. It's 1,000 light years away. And it's estimated that the total amount of matter inside here, of gas and dust, would be about 450 solar masses. That's plenty of fodder for young stars to be born. Another planetary nebula. Again, if our sun has to go out, and it will go out, I wouldn't complain if it goes out like this. This is in the constellation Fornax, so it's going to be very hard to see from Sacramento, as Fornax is a very, very far southern constellation. This is 1,500 light years away and 3 light years across. And O'Meara called it the Comet Planetary Nebula. Now I can see that, because especially in a smaller scope, it might look like a comet, a fuzzy buzzball. But he's the only one who calls it that, as far as I can tell. The common name that I've been able to find for it is the robin's egg, which makes sense, because robin's eggs are blue, and this is blue and somewhat egg-shaped. Now the next one is an oldie and goodie, and one that you will all probably know about, and one of the few that you can see with your naked eye. You don't need a telescope to see this. This is Messier number 45, the Pleiades in the constellation Taurus, an open star cluster, 444 light years away from us, 113 million years old. There are roughly 500 stars total in here, and collectively, this would, if you added them all together, it would be 4,800 times brighter than the sun. Another fun fact, in Japanese, their term for this object is Subaru. So next time you see a Subaru automobile, take a close look at the logo, and you'll understand where it came from. Next we have, this is another planetary nebula, NGC 1501, the Oyster Nebula. And I'll give it credit, this could kind of pass for the inside of an oyster shell. Again, there's a central star. This is 4,240 light years away. I first saw it in September of 2016. It's in the constellation Camelopardalis, the giraffe. And it's definitely worth checking out. Another planetary nebula, this time NGC 1535, known as Cleopatra's Eye. The eye I can see, the Cleopatra not so much. It's 6,500 light years away. It's a Herschel 400 object, which is good. It's in the constellation Eridanus, the river, which is right below Orion. This is kind of a tough one to see from Sacramento. We're at 38 degrees north latitude, and this is a pretty far south, but from a good dark site, good sky with a clear horizon, unobstructed by trees, you can spot it. Now this is a nice set of two open clusters. NGC 1535, which is here, and NGC 1528, the top left, and 1545 down here. These are in Perseus. So they are near, this is not so, the famous double cluster is not the only double cluster in Perseus. However, this isn't a true double cluster because these are not spatially related. The actual double cluster I showed earlier, those are linked. Those are gravitationally linked. They're in physical proximity. The stars here are so vastly different in age, and so that they're not linked. And even though they're both roughly 2,500 light years from Earth, both of these, they're not physically connected to each other. But they do make for a pretty pair. I've seen them both. O'Meara refers to them as the M&M double. I have no idea why. What would inspire him to call these M&Ms? Maybe because they have various colors? This is NGC 1647, the Pirate Moon Cluster. Again, that's a name that O'Meara thought of apparently by himself. Although this is a nice object, I've seen it. It's got about 90 stars. It's a Herschel 400. It's 1,800 light years away from Earth. I have no idea what about this says pirate or moon. If anyone does see a pirate or a moon anywhere in this, please email me or feel free to speak up and explain where on Earth anyone sees a pirate or a moon in here. Next object is, this is something I have not seen. Now I need to go look for it. This is IC, or Index Catalog 405. After the new general catalog was complete at the end of the 1800s, naturally as telescopes improved, more objects were being found. So many, after 7,900, about another 6,000 objects or so were found, and they were placed into what's called the Index Catalog, or IC. So this is the 405th object in that catalog. It's referred to as the Flaming Star Nebula. It's in the constellation Auriga the Charioteer, 1,500 light years away. Now, I've talked about emission nebulas, where the gas and dust are actually themselves giving off light due to all the energy from the nearby stars, and reflection nebulas, which merely reflect light. This is both. And this is about 5 light years across, and due to the color palette used, the orange areas, those are emission. That is light actually being made by the gas and dust itself because it's been so excited. The atoms and electrons are being so overstimulated by the nearby stars that they are spontaneously emitting their own light. The purple areas are a reflection of this bright hot star in the constellation Auriga. These are reflecting. These are actually emitting light because they're being excited by the nearby star. Here's a famous object. This is Messier object number 1, the first object in Charles Messier's catalog of fuzzy things that aren't comets. This is the famous Crab Nebula in Taurus. And this is a Hubble photo. It does not look that impressive in your telescope. You barely see this greenish area. You barely see a faint to moderate greenish blob. You don't see all these tendrils and all these filaments. Perhaps if you had the right nebula filter and you were in an extremely dark location and you had a 20-inch telescope, you might see a little bit of it. It's called the Crab because Lord Rosse, the Irish-based astronomer who first examined it with a 72-inch telescope, he didn't discover it, but he looked at it in detail, and he said to him it looked like a crab, although he later retracted that when he had better optics, but the name stuck. This is a supernova remnant. It was caused when a star much larger than our sun went supernova, fun fact, the Chinese observed it and actually saw it during the daytime, but it was so bright that they could see it, and they logged it as a new star. And in translating the Chinese calendar and their records, the light first became visible on Earth on July 4th of the year 1054 AD. The original star is estimated to be about 10 times heavier than the sun. This whole cloud is about 11 light years across, and it's expanding at 3 million miles an hour. So this object is getting dimmer because as it expands and slowly peters out, the light and energy is fading. It's quite possible that Messier would not be able to find it today in his crude telescope if he were here today, rather than the late 1700s when it was brighter. And a mind-boggling calculation is that the energy released in that explosion and still emanating from the pulsar or collapsed star at the heart of this is 17.5 quadrillion times the sun's energy released every second. And that's what a real crab looks like, by the way, just in case Lord Rossi or anyone else needed reminding. Everyone knows what this is, or everyone should. This is Messier 42 and 43. The Great Orion Nebula, and M43 is also called de Méron's Nebula because de Méron was the French astronomer who, looking at this more closely, was able to perceive it as somewhat of as a distinct object with merely the dark lane of cold gas and dust dividing the two. It's an emission nebula. It's heated by the 2,800 plus hot, very young stars inside of it. This is between 1,350 to 1,500 light years away from Earth. This whole complex is about 25 light years across. And all told, the size of this area is 20,000 times the size of the solar system. Now, if you were to go off in this direction, or as you can see, what you see here is NGC nebulae 1973, 75, and 77, collectively known as the Running Man Nebula. As you can see how the gas and dust inside there, the dark portions of it, seem to form a little stick figure, the Running Man. So if someone showed up like this and called themselves a running man in their costume, I'd give them a goodie bag. That actually looks like vaguely what it purports to be. There's a zoomed in version. You could definitely see. I'm not sure where the running comes from. Well, this leg is kind of bent. Again, this is a combination of emission and reflection nebulas, and it's 1,500 light years from Earth. This interesting object. Now, this does look spooky and somewhat unnerving. O'Meara calls it the Rubber Stamp Nebula. He seems to have made that up, but he seems to have got it right. That does remind me of a rubber stamp. It's also in Orion. It's a reflection nebula. The glowing part is a reflection nebula. It's I've seen it, and I focused too much on the glowing reflection, and I didn't barely notice. I need to go look at it again because quite honestly, I'll be honest, I didn't really notice the dark portion. And for a long time, this was thought to be a dark nebula. This portion, a dark nebula, is a cloud of very cold gas and dust that doesn't give off light and prevents light from other stars from getting through it. So it appears to be an unnaturally dark region. But recent observations from the Atacama Desert telescopes in Chile have verified this is not a dark nebula. This isn't an region of cold gas and dust. This is literally empty space. It's empty. And there just happen to be no stars behind it. So there's no, it's not cold gas and dust. It's literally empty space. Now, this is something that a lot of you will recognize. This also was in Orion called, this is a region just below the leftmost star. This is the leftmost star in Orion's belt called Alnitak. And the object on the list is called the Flame Nebula, which is seen here. Also next to it is one of the most famous objects. This is a true dark nebula, the Horsehead Nebula. Here the cold gas and dust just happens to take the shape of a horse head. The Flame Nebula, which is on the list, is an emission nebula. It's the nearby stars are causing the gas and dust to spontaneously emit light. O'Meara, here's a close-up of it, Has a nickname for this that I've never seen anywhere else. I always know it as the flame. I've seen a few people call it the tank tracks. He calls it the lips. Where he's getting the lips, I have no idea. Those are lips, ladies and gentlemen, and frightening ones, I might add. Next object is the Rosette Nebula. This is, again, a very popular object. It's in the constellation Monoceros, the unicorn. It's 5,200 light years from Earth. I first saw it in March of 2016. This is 130 light years across. The total amount of mass is estimated to be 10,000 times that of the Sun. It's a surprisingly faint object that you don't need to have an ultra-block filter or a nebula filter to see it, but it absolutely does help, especially with anything less than 10 inches of aperture. This object is called Hubble's Variable Nebula, something I haven't found yet. I need to go, if the sky ever becomes clean and I can actually get out this winter, I'm going to try to look for this because I have not seen it. This is also in Monoceros. It's 1 light year across. It's a reflection nebula, and it's called the Variable Nebula, Hubble's variable, because Edwin Hubble himself, back in the 20s and 30s, noticed that this object, NGC 2261, would change in shape and change in brightness, and apparently it would appear to change in shape periodically. And the leading explanation is that there are dense knots of very opaque gas and dust that pass close to the primary star, R Monoceratus, which is causing it sparks the reflection. And those clouds of gas and dust, as they move by the star, they cast shadows onto the reflecting dust. That's the primary theory so far. This is a nice object called Messier 41. It's an open cluster in Canis Major, relatively close to Sirius, the brightest star in the sky. It's an easy find in binoculars. It looks good in binoculars. It looks even better in a telescope at low to medium mag. It's colorful. About 100 stars there. You'll know you found it when you see that bright red star stands out. In most telescopes, the stars, most of them look whitish gray, but the red star does look red. O'Meara calls it the little beehive. Again, that seems to be something he made up, because I've never found in any other reference, online or in print, anyone calling this the little beehive. This is another nice open cluster, NGC 2301. O'Meara calls it Hagrid's dragon. If anyone sees a dragon in here, please let me know. No candy for you. Not you personally. You, whoever thought this was a dragon. It is in Monoceros, and it's 2,840 light years away. Now this is a famous object, NGC 2392. In older days, it was called the Eskimo Nebula, or the Clown Face Nebula. Recently, the International Astronomical Union decided that Eskimo Nebula was a politically incorrect name, and I can see that. So they will no longer refer to it as that. They also decided, strangely, that Clown Face Nebula was offensive. So now they won't refer to it as anything other than NGC 2392. I have no idea why Clown Face is offensive. I can see where both nicknames came from. If you have a good dark sky and decent mag or decent aperture, you will see a definite central portion with a double shell around it. This star is a planetary nebula. The star is estimated to have died 10,000 years ago. This is 6,500 light years away from Earth. It is a Herschel 400 and a Caldwell object. And if you can only see a few objects on this list, this is one you definitely need to check out, NGC 2392. This was a fun object of mine that holds some good memories. I saw it out at the Black Butte Star Party when we were doing those. I saw it in April of 2017 for the first time. This is a globular cluster. This is the first of these objects we've reached in this list. Open clusters are inside the Milky Way, and they're young stars. globular clusters are actually outside the Milky Way. The Milky Way, like every sizable galaxy, has a halo of these objects, which are very old stars, 10, 12, 13 billion year old stars. The oldest stars theorized to have formed maybe out of proto-galaxies or dwarf galaxies that got sucked in by the Milky Way's gravitational field and now orbit the Milky Way. And this, most globular clusters are seen in the summer skies. That's when you have the best view looking toward the center of the Milky Way. This particular globular cluster is in the constellation of Lynx, which is a winter constellation. A southern constellation is pretty far south. Actually, no, it's not. But it's a winter constellation. Forgive me. And you don't see a whole lot of globulars in the winter. And this is in a region of sky where there just aren't many globular clusters at all. So it had acquired the nickname of the intergalactic tramp or the intergalactic wanderer. It's 300,000 light years away. It has an estimated 900,000, a mass of 900,000 times that of the sun. There are several tens of thousands, probably a few 100,000 stars inside of it. It's also a Caldwell object. Now this interesting object is this is a planetary nebula. There's the central dead star with the shell of shedded gases expanding outward. I've seen it. I saw it in April of 2016 for the first time. I logged it because it's a Herschel 400 object. Didn't take particular note of it. O'Meara calls it the albino butterfly. Again, that's not something I see in any reference. But this time, though, I get where the name comes from. That could pass for an albino butterfly. So if anyone came to my door dressed as this, I would give them an extra Snickers bar. This is 4,000 light years away. The total luminosity is 1,100 times brighter than that of the sun. And the central star is calculated to be burning at 360,000 degrees Fahrenheit. This is a famous object, the Messier number 44, also known as the Beehive cluster. This is the true Beehive cluster in the constellation Cancer. Now you're thinking, Cancer at Halloween? Cancer is a spring constellation. And that's true. So if you're going to want to see this on Halloween, you're going to be up till very late at night. This is basically an all-night trick-or-treat hunt. It's an open cluster of relatively young stars, 577 light years away from Earth, about 300 stars more or less, and this is 23 light years across. This is an impressive object. It's called the UFO galaxy, for reasons that should be pretty obvious. And it really does look like a UFO in a telescope. You see the long elongated, looks like a glowing flying saucer. NGC 2683, I first saw it in April of 2017. It's 25 million light years away from Earth. And fun fact, this galaxy has an estimated 300 globular clusters circling it, whereas our own Milky Way has only about 150. And it's in a rich galaxy field in the constellation Lynx, as you can see by the other galaxies in the background. Yeah, that's what I saw when I first looked at it. But as you can see, my scope was not properly collimated, so didn't get to make it official. That lovely object is NGC 2841, which I first saw in April of 2016. It's roughly the size of the Andromeda galaxy, which would make it a bit bigger than the Milky Way. It's 46 million light years away from Earth. It's known as the tiger's eye, which, quite frankly, is not a bad name. So it wins a pack of M&Ms. It's in the constellation Ursa Major, or the Great Bear. This you should recognize from my background photo. It's Messier 81 and Messier 82. M81 and M82. Bode's galaxy, named after Johann Elard Bode, who discovered it in the 1700s. And this is nicknamed the Cigar Galaxy. They're both in Ursa Major. They're about 12 million light years away from Earth. If this galaxy looks unusual, we'll get to that when I show you the photo. There's M81 as seen by Hubble. Beautiful grand design spiral. M81 is the chief galaxy in a group of 34 galaxies. And so M81 is the chair of a group of about 34 galaxies, including M82. And if M82 looks disturbed, it is. When it passed close to M81 several million years ago, the gravitational power of M81 shocked it and distorted it, which is why it's bent out of shape and has these red regions of intense star formation, where all the gas and dust was shocked by the gravitational interaction. M82, despite being a small galaxy, has 5 times the brightness of the entire Milky Way. And why they call it a cigar, you can tell from here, and you can really tell if you see it in the scope. This is Messier 97, the Owl Nebula. And again, Halloween theme, and this does look like an owl. It's a planetary, a little over 2,000 light years away, almost 2 light years across. It's only about 8,000 years old. So the star that had this died about 8,000 years ago. The central star has been calculated to be burning at 221,000 degrees. And this shell is expanding at 74,000 miles an hour. I looked for the Owl Nebula and all I found was that. I'm sorry. This lovely object is called NGC 3628. It's part of the Leo triplet with M65 and M66. So if you're wondering, Leo is a spring constellation. Again, to see this on Halloween, you're going to be up very late. You're going to be up pushing sunrise. This is nicknamed the Hamburger Galaxy. I've also seen many references to it as Sarah's Galaxy. For the life of me, I can't figure out who Sarah was. That's never explained in any reference I've been able to find. O'Meara calls it King Hamlet's ghost, for which I would take away all his candy. I see nothing in here that reminds me of Hamlet or a ghost. It's 35 million light years away. That is the whole entire Leo triplet. And there's M65, M66, and 3628. This is Melot 111, one of the few objects not to be either a Messier or an NGC on this object. It's a loose, scattered open cluster in the constellation Coma Berenices. It's known as the Coma star cluster. It's visible with the naked eye. If you look at it, if you have a decent dark sky and you're looking in that region of the sky, you will see what appears to be a faint patch of light. It's one of those things that's annoying because you look at it, and you think there's something there, but I can't tell for sure what it is. Then you turn binoculars or a small scope on it, and you see a nice collection of stars. O'Meara calls it the Flying Witch Cluster. Again, something he made up because every reference book I found calls it the Coma Cluster. And again, Coma Berenices is a spring constellation, so you can be up all night. This is about 280 light years from us, and is about 450 million years old. Okay. O'Meara is Stephen James O'Meara. Stephen James O'Meara is admittedly one of the world's premier visual observers. He has written many guidebooks on visual observing, guides to the Messier objects and the Herschel objects. He compiles a lot of these observation lists and challenges for amateur astronomers. Stephen James O'Meara is deservedly a legend in the astronomy community, although I've had my own quibbles with him. I don't like the way he interprets the Messier catalog, and I don't like the way he makes up nicknames, and I don't like the way he arbitrarily seems to think that he's the king of the world and can say that there are only 109 Messier objects rather than being 110, the way most people seem to think that there are. But I'll give him credit. He compiled this ghost hunt list, and he is truly a visual observer without peer. This next object is called the Box Galaxy. Okay, that does look like a box, so this gets some candy. NGC 4449. This is roughly the size of the Large Magellanic Cloud. So and it's similar in appearance. So if you can't swing a trip below the equator to see the Large Magellanic Cloud, well, you can find this in Canes Venatici. And as you see the theme here, we are now getting very late into the night on Halloween, because to see Canes Venatici, that's something you usually think about seeing in April. So to see it in October, you're going to be pulling in an all-nighter. It's a Herschel 400 and a Caldwell object, Caldwell 21. It's 10 million light years away from us and is about 16,000 light years in diameter. This is a fun one. NGC 4565, called, you would think this would be called the UFO galaxy. But to see the UFO effect, you either need a big telescope or the Hubble Space Telescope. The common nickname is the Needle Galaxy. And if you see it in telescope, you'll see why. It appears to be a sliver of silvery light. Silvery light. Say that 3 times fast. That's a Halloween trick. It's 32 million light years away from us. It's slightly larger than our own Milky Way. Canes Venatici is a constellation very rich in galaxies. As you can see, you can spot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 background galaxies, 8. I'm not even looking that hard. That is a constellation that is ripe for galaxy season, which is a talk I gave last spring or a couple springs ago, and may bear repeating. This is a fun one. This is called the Whale Galaxy, because imagine a whale's head, front fin. It's a little too far up. You could pass for a front fin, and there's the tail. So imagine a big blue whale swimming through the cosmos. It's a Herschel and Caldwell object, Herschel 400, and it's a Caldwell 32. It's a barred spiral, which you're seeing edge on. I first saw it in May of 2016. It's 22 million light years away. It's NGC, it's at 4631. See, this is its companion galaxy, NGC 4627. And it's called the Pup. It's a small galaxy that is gravitationally bound to the big whale. So it's called the Whale and the Pup. And I'll be honest, I had a heck of a time seeing the Pup. Even though I first saw the whale in May of 2016, it took a long time and a darker sky before I could finally see the Pup. This is well worth checking out. This is another fun galaxy. It's called the Hockey Stick, for obvious reasons. It's actually 2 galaxies. The main handle of the hockey stick, all the way up to this point, the bend, this is NGC 4656, which again I also saw in late May of 2016 for the first time. And just like with its 18 million light years away, it's a spiral barred that we're seeing edge on. But just like with the Whale and the Pup, this galaxy here that basically completes the end of the hockey stick, the striker, if you will, that's a separate galaxy called 4657, which I had a devil of a time seeing. It wasn't until several observing sessions later that I was finally able to bag it. It's much fainter and it's much harder to see. So this is a good challenge, and once you see the complete hockey stick, that's something that'll stick with you. It's well worth seeing. Now this is an oldie but goodie. Most people know what this is. This is Messier 51, the Whirlpool Galaxy, again in Canes Venatici. And Messier 51 and its companion NGC 5195, which is gravitationally bound to it. M51 is also NGC 5194. Now, Messier thought this was all basically one giant object because his small refractor blurred it into one big object, although he did say it had parts, M51A and M51B. If you see it in a small telescope, it does look like a snowman-shaped, misshaped blob. It takes a larger aperture to notice, oh, it is 2 separate things. And with 8 inches or more on a good dark night, and you bump up the mag to 125, 150, you will definitely see the spiral structure of the whirlpool. And one of the biggest treats of my life was at Black Butte up near Chico. It's a good dark sky area. In my 16-inch telescope, it was a good dark night, And I actually was able to see a tinge of blue in this object, and that's the first time I've ever seen color in a galaxy through a scope that I've looked at, or I've looked through. Another famous Messier object, this is the Pinwheel Galaxy, Messier 101. Now this gets all the candy. This actually looks like what it's nicknamed. Oh, one of my coworkers. Hi, Sarah. So this lovely object is called the Pinwheel Galaxy. It is Messier 101 in Ursa Major. It's a face-on spiral galaxy. It's 21 million light years away from us. It's about twice as big as the Milky Way. It's estimated to contain 1 trillion stars. And yet for all that size and all its hugeness, it can be rather difficult to see if you don't know exactly where to look, because it's spread out over such a large area. Its total overall surface brightness is quite dim. And it can be a challenge. Given a good dark sky and knowing where to look, you can see it in binoculars, but it's hard to see, surprisingly hard to see in a scope. Although if you get a good clean sky and good aperture, you'll not only see the spiral, you might even be lucky enough to see just the barest hint of blue as well. If you can get this object under a dark sky with good aperture and good magnification, it's great. This is another favorite, Messier number 13, the Great Globular Cluster in Hercules. Again, this is a globular cluster, so it's very old stars, estimated to be almost 12 billion years old. This is about 25,000 light years away from us, so it's outside the Milky Way, but orbiting it. There are estimated to be 300,000 stars all packed into this tight little globe. Older stars, for the most part. You see a few blue stars, and blue stars are telltale young stars. So even though the majority of these stars are older, there are a few younger ones inside of it, because the older stars are so packed in that they're bumping into each other, and the resultant collisions of gas and dust are igniting a few new stars. But for the most part, globs are collections of very old stars that are just waiting to expire. Now, this lovely object is called the Cat's Eye Nebula. And yes, I can see why it's called the Cat's Eye. Now, this is a Hubble photo, especially enhanced to short regions of various intensity of emission of light, of X-rays, and other forms of radiation. You don't see this when you look at it with the naked eye. You do see a bit of a round dot that does kind of looks like a glowing cat's eye at night. So this does get candy. It's a planetary nebula. There's a central star that died. It's expanding at 42,000 miles an hour. The intrinsic brightness of it, it's a good thing that it's far away, because its intrinsic brightness is 10,000 times that of the sun. It's 3,000 light years away from us. And this shell of gas is expanding at 42,000 miles an hour. And the amount of energy put off by it is losing 20 trillion with a T, 20 trillion tons of mass every second. So 20 teratons, if that's not a phrase, I just made it, because if O'Meara can make up stuff, so can I. 20 teratons of mass per second is being lost. Now this is a lovely object called the Emerald Nebula, or as O'Meara calls it, the Emerald Eye. It's another planetary, 3,500 light years away. Emerald Eye because the central star apparently looks green. Okay, Wayne, take care. I realize I'm droning on, but I'll try to speed it up. Hope not boring you all to tears here, but hey, it's Halloween. You're supposed to be scared. I'm going to set a record for being so terrifyingly boring that you can say you survived the experience of having to listen to me talk. Wayne, thank you and good night. So the Emerald Eye is something I've not seen. It's an Ophiuchus, and Ophiuchus is a classic summer constellation. So if you're seeing this in Halloween, you're either looking very, very early, because Ophiuchus is setting, it's in the twilight, or most likely you've pulled an all-nighter and are catching this right before sunrise. Now, this is a very famous object, Messier 16, the Eagle Nebula in Serpens Cauda, the head of the serpent. O'Meara calls it the ghost puppet, which is, again, he made that up because there isn't one book or online reference to astronomy that calls this thing the ghost puppet. It's always universally known as the Eagle Nebula. Although when you look at this in a telescope, it can be hard to see the nebulosity unless you have either very large aperture or a good nebula filter. You can definitely see the open cluster that's causing it to glow. It's an emission nebula, being heat. The gas and dust is spontaneously glowing from the heat of these stars. And there you see the famous pillars of creation. The Hubble image of that is iconic. These are the dark clouds of gas and dust out of which new stars are being born. Okay, Billy. Well, thank you for putting up with me till midnight. You're welcome for the presentation. If I had candy, I'd give you, if I could, I'd give you a big bucketful. But thank you for joining us. This is another famous object. This is called the Swan Nebula. Imagine an upside down swan. There's the body, there's the head, also known as the Omega Nebula, but I prefer calling it a swan. And I remember vividly seeing this through my first Dobsonian, an 8-inch Dobsonian back in August of 2015, right when I got back into this hobby after a long absence. Seeing the swan from my local park, no filter needed. You can see the swan in an 8-inch Dob, no problem, as long as the sky is clean. It just has such a giddy feeling to be able to see, to know that this is a place where new stars are being born, that it's almost 6,000 light years away from us. This is 15 light years across. There are 800 stars inside there. The total area is, the swan itself, I should say, but the cluster is 15 light years across. I think the total area is 140 by 110 in terms of light years. Just seeing this was I knew I'd made the right choice to get back into this hobby when I first saw it. Now this seemingly bland set of objects are things I haven't seen. Actually, no, I've seen one of them. This one here on the upper right, this is NGC 6633, an open cluster in Ophiuchus. So again, basically a summertime object. This is about 1,000 light years from Earth, about 30 stars. They're young stars, only 660 million years old. Our sun's about 10 times older. And this here is another open cluster, IC 4756, 13,000 light years away from Earth. And O'Meara put them together, and he calls them Tweedledum and Tweedledee. I have no idea why. He's the only one who does that. 6633 is a Herschel 400 object. That's why I looked for it and found it. I can't remember being too impressed. No other book that I can find or reference calls this Tweedledum and Tweedledee. But next summer, especially in a bigger scope, I'm going to try to see if I can find these in the same field of view. So it's giving me something to look for. Astronomically, resources that I have that I can find refer to this as Graph's cluster. Another open cluster is NGC 6700, which I first saw in October of 2015. I'm sorry, 6709. I first saw it in October of 2015. Now that night holds some sentimental value for me. October 9th, 2015 was the first time I ever did any observing from HGO up at Blue Canyon. And it was a great night. I was using my then, at the time, new 10-inch push to Orion and telescope Dobsonian. And I had an epic night of tracking down open clusters in planetary nebula in Cygnus and Aquila. This is an Aquila, and this is something you'd see at the beginning of the night because even though Aquila is in the Aquila, the eagle, is part of the summer triangle, and it's October, the summer triangle will still be visible after sunset for a few hours, so you can definitely catch some of the clusters and nebula in there. This is 315 million years old. 3,500 light years away from Earth and 18 light years across. Who doesn't know what this is? This is Messier 57, the famous Ring Nebula. I first saw it in July of 2015. And it brings a smile to my face because when I first got back into this hobby in 2015, this is probably the third thing I saw on my telescope. And again, it just reinforced the fact that, yeah, I was right to get back into this hobby. Again, I only hope that when our star goes, it forms something like this. It's a planetary nebula. The central star is, it died about 7,000 years ago. This is about 2,300 light years away from Earth. This is about 2.6 light years across. And this ring is expanding at 54,000 miles an hour. The central star is burning at 215,000 degrees Fahrenheit, as according to the best calcs by astronomers. This interesting object is called the Blinking Planetary Nebula. Caldwell 15, a Herschel 400 object. It's another planetary that I first saw in August of 2015. And it's called the Blinking because it does have the effect. It's weird. You can be looking at it, then it'll seem to go away and then come back. And part of this is because it's a relatively faint and tenuous object. It's bright, in visual astronomy terms, but it has a way of blinking in and out of visual sight unless you're until you stare at it very hard. And even when you do, you'll sometimes lose sight of it. That's thought to be caused by rotating clouds of dust around the core of the object. Again, it's another planetary nebula, 2,000 light years away from us. It's a Caldwell object as well, Caldwell 15. Caldwell objects are generally impressive in their own right, and the Caldwell list is one very well worth pursuing. All right, thank you, Gene. Look forward to seeing you soon. I'm going to be wrapping this up in. I only have a dozen more or so. But thank you for attending. Everyone who's chatting to leave. Although, see, if you stayed to the end, you would have gotten more candy. So it's your fault that you left. This is the Foxhead cluster, NGC 6819, discovered by Caroline Herschel herself. Again, where is the Foxhead? Although O'Meara didn't think of that. That is, I've seen that name in published works. So my only guess is this triangular thing, or maybe as a total, would that be a Foxhead? Let me know in the chat section. Of course, this is the Dumbbell or Apple Core Nebula. Messier number 27. It's in Vulpecula. So again, you'll be seeing this at the very start of the evening at Halloween. You have to catch it before it sets, but you can easily find it at Halloween. It's a planetary nebula and about 10,000 years old. And I do believe this is the first thing I found in my 8-inch Dobsonian when I got back into the hobby in July of 2015. And it does look like a dumbbell in the scope, and it'll always hold a special place, I think, of anyone who sees it for the first time. Open cluster 6866. O'Meara calls it the frigate bird. Maybe you see a bird, I'm not sure. It was discovered by Caroline Herschel herself in 1783. Now, this is a very popular object with astrophotographers. It's NGC 6888, the Crescent Nebula, Caldwell 27. It is an emission nebula. It's 250,000 years old, about 5,000 light years away from us, 25 light years across. It can be hard to see. I first saw it in May of 2017 at Black Butte through a 22-inch Obsession Dobsonian telescope. And 22 inches is about the magnitude of aperture you're going to need to get a good view of this visually without a nebula filter, because it can be hard to see in small apertures. This handsome object is called Mothra. If any of you are fans of Japanese monster flicks, you'll remember that Mothra is a rival to Godzilla. And I thought that O'Meara had made it up, but I did find one other reference online as the Mothra cluster. So it's just an open cluster, a billion years old, which is old for an open cluster. It's 2,500 light years away from Earth. And why is it called Mothra? Because I don't see a moth. But then studying the region, it is near, here it is, and it's relatively near what we're getting to soon, the Veil Nebula, which at low power, wide field view, you could kind of mistake that for a moth. So calling it the Mothra cluster does have some justification. Now here is an interesting object that I definitely need to check out. By the way, I've never seen the Mothra cluster. It's in Vulpecula. I need to look for it. I've never seen this either. This is Lynn's Dark Nebula 988, nicknamed the Northern Coal Sack, after the famous dark nebula in the southern hemisphere called the Coal Sack. As again, this is an area of very cold gas and dust where light from stars behind it cannot get through or gets through only weakly, thus creating the illusion of a dark patch or hole in the sky. So I'm going to have to check this out when we get back to observing. And by contrast, there is the true coal sack, the coal sack from the southern hemisphere, which almost literally does look like a hole in the Milky Way itself. Now, as I was talking about in Mothra earlier, this is a large view of the Veil Nebula. The Veil Nebula is a supernova remnant like the Crab Nebula. It's about 1,400 light years away from us. And this is a star that exploded thousands of years ago. And it's gotten so big, it's in two parts. This is the Eastern Veil. This is the Western Veil. The whole thing is referred to as the Cygnus Loop because it's in the constellation Cygnus. You can see this without a nebula filter, but an oxygen-3 filter really brings it out. So here's a close-up of the part of the Eastern Veil called the Bat, and NGC is 6995. The whole eastern portion is NGC 6992 and 95, but this is focusing on 6995. This actually does look like a bat. This is an enhanced false color image, but if you get an O3 filter, you can actually see it looking like this, although it's all going to appear whitish gray. And here's the Western Veil, 6960, close to the star 52 Cygni, although that's just a line of sight issue. 52 Cygni is not related to the nebula itself. But this Western Veil is also known as the Witch's Broom, which you can see that, and does give it an appropriate Halloween theme. Continuing on through Cygnus, this is NGC 7000, the North America Nebula, with here's the West Coast, more or less Texas, Florida down here, East Coast going up there. Here's the Pelican, that's the Pelican's bill. It's really so huge, it can be hard to see. It's best seen at lower mag with a good O3 or ultra block filter. And it's definitely worth checking out. I first saw it in October of 2015. It's an emission nebula about 1,800 light years from Earth and about 100 light years across. This is NGC 7008, the Fetus Nebula. O'Meara calls it the coat button. He's the only one. Every standard reference on this object calls it the Fetus. It's a planetary nebula. Again, somewhat ironic that it's called the Fetus because the fetus is about birth, whereas planetary nebulas are death. They're stars that have died. This is a 2,800 light years away and 1 light year across. I first saw it in July of 2016, and I first saw it in a 16-inch scope made by Cyrus's very own Lonnie Robinson. If you were here tonight, I would thank him, but thank you, Lonnie, for letting me see this through your telescope. Much easier to see it in yours than the 10-inch telescope I had at the time. Actually, no, the 8-inch telescope. No, I would have had a 10 by then. Moving on, we're getting close. Bear with me. This is called the Iris Nebula. Caldwell number 4, NGC 7023. It's an open cluster of stars that is causing the reflection nebula effect. So the light from these stars is bouncing off the local gas and dust. 1,300 light years across. I'm sorry, 1,300 away, 6 light years across, and it's a Herschel 400 Part 2 object. This is called the Saturn Planetary Nebula, NGC 7009. Now, it doesn't look like this in your telescope, but you will see a circular dot with little arms coming out of the sides, or anses. That's why it's called the Saturn Planetary Nebula, because it does bear a vague resemblance to the Saturn shape. Those little anses are jets of hot gas being blown out by the central, or what's left of the central star. It is a planetary nebula, Caldwell 55. It is a star that has died, although what's left of the central star is still 20 times brighter than the sun. And it's roughly 3,000 light years away from us and a half a light year across. Okay, well, found down to the final half dozen. This is called the Cocoon Nebula, IC 5146. I need to track this down. I probably need my 16-inch and a nebula filter because I've not been able to find it as of yet. It's in Cygnus, 4,000 light years away and 15 light years across. It does kind of look like a cocoon, so I would give it some candy. This is the Helix Nebula, Caldwell 63 in Aquarius. Again, it's a planetary nebula. There's the dead central star. There's the expanding cylinder of gas moving away from it. Now, it's a nice object. Like I said, it's in Aquarius. So you'll be seeing it in the middle of the night or late evening to about midnight. It'd be the best time on Halloween night. I first saw it in October 2015. It helps to have a nebula filter, but if you have a good aperture in a dark sky, you can see it without one. So what makes this Halloweenish? There's nothing particularly eerie about it. But what made it famous was a famous image taken of this object by the Spitzer Space Telescope, taken by this nebula in infrared. And there it's called the Eye of God or the Eye of Sauron. And that is eerie enough to merit a place on any Halloween list. But this is how it appears in infrared light, with the blue being colder and the red being warmer. All right, well, getting very close. This is galaxy NGC 7331 in Pegasus. It's the anchor of what's called the Deerlick group of galaxies. There are several other galaxies around it. It's a large galaxy, twice as big as the Milky Way, 47 million light years away from us. It's moving away from us, like most galaxies are, at almost 2 million miles an hour. This is also Caldwell 30, and of course it's a Herschel 400 object. Now this is called the Blue Snowball Nebula. You're wondering, why is it called the Blue Snowball? There's nothing blue about this. This is a Hubble image with the colors falsified with red, yellow, white, green to show the intensity of temperatures of the different glowing gases around it. So Hubble basically used colors to color code the temperature and energy of the gases radiating away from it. I first saw it in October 2015, NGC 7662, 3,200 light years away from Earth. The central star is burning at 135,000 degrees, Caldwell 22. And if you see it in a scope, it does look like this. Okay, it is blue. Not quite as in-your-face blue as this amateur long-exposure photo, but you definitely will see a blue snowball. So the name is accurate. All right, last two. This is Messier 52 in Cassiopeia, the Scorpion cluster. Where on Earth anyone sees a scorpion is unknown to me, unless maybe that's the tail and those are the claws, or this, it looks blurred. These are just a bunch of stars inside very close together. Maybe that is a scorpion. Your guess is as good as mine. It is a nice object and worth looking at. There are about 193 stars in this cluster. It's about 35 million years old and 5,000 light years away. And last one. This is a lovely open cluster called Caroline's cluster because it was discovered by Caroline Herschel herself in 1783. It's also known as the White Rose. I first saw it in September of 2015, 7,600 light years from Earth. O'Meara calls it the Screaming Skull, and he must have just made that up to justify putting it on the Halloween list because nothing about this says screaming or skull. That is the all of the list that I'm going to show. That's about 76 objects out of 109. As I said, I can email you the complete list of 109, or I included a link to it in the chat section. But yes, you can see all of these in one night if you're willing to pull an all-nighter. And I've done that before. I spent all night at the telescope. And when you spend all night at the telescope, you look like this. And this truly is the most horrifying image of the night.
Oh my God.
Yes. You too can spend all night at the telescope and you can end up like that.
Please take that down.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, happy Halloween. Oh,
Thank you, Raj.
I'm surprised you didn't all quit en masse after seeing that. But, so that was the ghost hunt. So I wish the circumstances were different. I wish we could do this Halloween. Although I suppose if you can find a dark place to be all alone, all by yourself, or with one observing buddy you trust, you could get to work on it. Because I do believe that Halloween is close to the new moon. I need to check when is the nearest new moon. Oh, and some reminders in terms of general astronomy. And I forgot Nancy. Thank you for reminding me, Nancy Bluford. I should have said this at the beginning. The Orionids are coming October 20th, 21st. Halloween is a blue moon. Thank you, Nancy. So Halloween night itself would not be the best time to look at this. Actually, the moon is almost new right now. So if we could get out tonight under a dark sky, that tonight would be as good a night as any. Also, Mars is at opposition on October 13th. It's not going to be this close or bright again until 2035. I'm going to see if I can give it a go Monday night with my Apo refractor, get a good look, maybe see the polar caps. Unfortunately, times and circumstances don't permit better observing. Hopefully, maybe for October next year, we can get together at HGO before it gets too cold. Because October, in my experience, is basically the last month you can get up there before it gets just unbearably cold at night. And quite honestly, that first night in October of 2015, around about 2:30 in the morning, I was shivering. And even though I had brought a winter jacket, I was getting cold. But it was worth it just to have such an epic night. I think I saw over 60 deep space objects I'd never seen before. So thank you, Ness, for the reminder. So the Orionids this October, Mars opposition. Halloween is a blue moon. Any questions, comments, complaints?
Raj, thank you for a great presentation.
And yes, I know you're all complaining about that last picture, but this had to be scary.
Yeah, you recorded this, you know.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. And I'm going to stop recording now, even though we can stay on for a little while longer, but I'm going to stop recording